all you literary legends and luminaries. Today's episode of Book Smart is partly a Throwback Thursday episode, but turned into a 2 books in 1 episode. When I chose 30-something stories by the writers of 30-something as my throwback book, my research led me then to 30-something at 30, an oral history by Scott Ryan. I need to provide a little context to my picks for today's episodes. The summer before 9th grade, when I was 14 years old, I fell in love with the reruns of 30-something on Lifetime. I had been taping LA Law at 2 o'clock, which I had already cycled through once. So when I sat down after I got home from my first job as a bagger at the local grocery store, instead of jamming out to the theme song of LA Law, 30-something's pilot episode started playing. I was thoroughly baffled, but since I was currently shoving my face with whatever leftovers my mom saved from supper, I was too lazy to stop the tape. Yes, a tape, as in VCR tape, and find something else to watch. It wouldn't matter because I was hooked on 30-something in a matter of minutes. My friends didn't understand why I loved such an old people's show. I'll spare you the details of my adolescent angst, but 8th grade was not fun for me. It didn't help that I felt I had no control over anything in my life, as if my opinion never mattered and my voice wasn't even heard. I longed for autonomy and independence, and I had 4 long years ahead of me before I could make my own decisions. As an almost 9th grader, watching a show about 30-something adults was what I longed for. I couldn't wait to be 30 when I could make my own choices and have control over my life. And I wouldn't have to deal with the likes of being a grocery store bagger, fighting my older sister to use the car or the phone, and I wouldn't even have to eat meat if I didn't want to. And since I loved TV movies that were based on a true story, a show like 30-something that looked real and authentic, maybe even a bit boring to those who prefer more Yellowstone-like shows, was a perfect fit for me. 30-something would forever remain my favorite TV show, with my so-called life coming in a very close second. 30-something aired on ABC from 1987 to 1991. Lifetime picked up the reruns that summer, which is where I discovered it. I have no idea if it was all the rage at the time it aired. My mom said they tried to watch it, but they found the characters whiny yuppies. My mom said the people on the show just needed to get over it and move on. They were always complaining about something. Small things, according to my mother. My dad called it drivel. Apparently, they were not alone in these opinions. Some even called the characters on 30-something skinny white people from hell. But I related to all the female characters, even at 14 years old. I would relate to the male characters after I aged a bit. I loved Melissa's style, but knew I could never pull off the one earring look. I related to Nancy and envied her bookwork. I felt like Ellen, not always relating to those around me. Hope was my least favorite, but I wondered about her life the most. My parents were 30-something at the time, the same generation as the skinny white people from hell. Yet my parents married right out of high school. They had my sister 2 years later. My family emulated the likes more of Donna Reed and Father Knows Best more than 30-something, so the Hope character was the most of an anomaly for me. Hope was nothing like my mother. That show made me realize that there were so many other options in life, so many paths, and you didn't always have to pick the most practical one. There wasn't a right or wrong way to live your life, that there was this whole big wide world that awaited me once I turned 30, or at least 20. In that moment, in 1991, 30-something became my world, an escape of all the doldrums of my about to enter 9th grade existence. I wanted my adult life to be like 30-something. The following spring, I would find the 30-something soundtrack. These little things in CD cases, which I never knew existed. And I would have never found it if my mother hadn't forced me to go to Target with her after I spent days in my room when my very first boyfriend dumped me. And how I ended up with this book, I just can't remember. I know I got it after the soundtrack, but before I graduated high school. I know this because I used this book for a creative writing project when I was a senior in high school. Did I buy it myself after stumbling upon it at Walden Books or B. Dalton at the mall? Or did my mom find it and it was a Christmas present? I have no idea. I hate that I can't remember such details. But this was a time in my life when I wanted to be a writer. I couldn't make such a statement, though, in my household, for writing was not considered a career choice. Too risky. Writing was to be a hobby, something you do on the side, which maybe makes you a little bit of extra money here and there. I grew up in a household that would never have approved of a starving artist. I particularly loved script writing at the time. I wrote a play when I was in 3rd grade. I often wondered about how movies and TV shows were made in regards to the creative process and the writing process. So I cherished every inch of this book. Even if you haven't heard of 30-something Stories is very insightful when it comes to writing. 9 scripts from the show are in this book, each by a different writer. The writer introduces their script, giving background info either on their process or the show or the struggles that went along with it. I find the How to Be a Writer books particularly frustrating. In one way, they all say the same thing. In another way, they contradict one another. This is not one of those books. It allows you to appreciate the process and finished product. You take much more from their examples, especially if you've seen the completed episode, and see how it was written, and what was written then becomes a television episode. The episode wouldn't exist without the writer having written it, yet it wouldn't exist without someone creating it. Marshall Herskowitz and Edward Zwick pitched their new show as this, and it is written about to introduce the book. This is a show about life on Earth as we know it, at least a small slice of it. It's about a group of people, all of a certain age, who know enough about life to be totally confused by it. It's about growing up, no matter how old you are, which means owning up to certain realities, swallowing a pill or two. Not necessarily the compromise of principles, but rather the recognition that many of our notions of the future were idealizations and can't be lived in the world. It's what we like to call the dialectic. That in modern life, everything seems in opposition to itself. You want to have a baby, but you want to have a job. You want to be free, but you want to settle down. You don't want a lot of responsibilities, but you want to make a living. And it cuts deeper than the questions of lifestyle. You want to be honest, but you don't want to be hurtful. You want to be accommodating, but you want what you want. You want to be grateful, but you're also in pain. And it's a show about creating your own family. If I ever needed anything at 14, that sums it up. And I'd love to plug the show because if you have no interest in either book, you should really watch the show, but no streaming service has it. The DVDs are your only option. I'm rewatching them again. I watch the show every 4 to 5 years or so, and every time I discover new things. That doesn't happen when I rewatch other shows. Yet now I care about Michael and Elliot's business. I want nothing more than to clean up Michael and Hope's house because it is such a mess and I can't take it anymore. I'm rooting for Elliot, even though he's such an ass sometimes. I want to shake some sense into Ellen and her ruination of her relationships. I've become nostalgic with Gary's imagined conversations with Emily Dickinson, and I still relate the most to Melissa and her heart. All the while, I'm griping about using the stupid DVD player and complaining why no streaming service offers 30-something. The show is like no other. Ken Olin, who was Michael on the show, ended up producing and directing This Is Us. Yet This Is Us is much more dramatic than 30-something. 30-something is the drama version of Seinfeld, the day-to-day monotony of life, our relationships and how they simultaneously irritate us and inspire us, and how to navigate our feelings of inadequacy, success, and failure, change, and what it means to be happy. While there are a couple of huge plot points and storylines that occur, most episodes, not a lot of drama happens. Maybe that's why my mother didn't care for it, especially when Hope and Michael are arguing about grocery getting and laundry. But that isn't quite true. Once school started in the fall, the second I got home, I would watch 30-something. Unless I was scheduled to work that evening, then I had to wait until I got home at 7 to watch it. One day, my mom said, "You'll never believe what happens today on 30-something. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it's a doozy." But that wasn't what I was all excited about. It's that my mother was secretly watching it and didn't tell me. We could have been talking about it all this time, yet she still admitted the characters needed to do whatever needed to be done and quit whining about it. But she did admit that the show wasn't that bad. That's the most I could get her to say. Maybe she gave up on it too quickly because my dad was absolutely not going to sit through that drivel. Yet my mom did find it good enough to watch the reruns. Then, later, for Christmas, my mom bought me a globe-shaped fish tank to which I bought 7 small fish, named after a character on 30-something. I made sure my Hope and Michael fish matched since they were married, and Nancy and Elliot matched even though they were almost divorced. My Melissa fish was a bright orange color to match her orangey hair, while Ellen was a black fish to match her dark hair. My Gary fish had longer whiskers since he had the beard and the longer hair. I adored my globe fish tank until the algae became unmanageable. Mom and I bought a little snail that was supposed to naturally clean the tank, but that didn't work. I feared I stressed out all my fish every time I cleaned their home, which was much more hassle than it was worth. But I knew my fish as well as one could know any fish, although I associated their personalities with their 30-something counterparts. I wasn't surprised when Nancy and Elliot didn't get along, or Melissa snubbed Gary, or Gary ignored Melissa, or even at Hope and Michael's passive aggressiveness to each other. My friends thought I was crazy, but I didn't care. I carried my adoration for 30-something well beyond my 30s. This mug was my very first online purchase from Amazon that I bought shortly after I was married. That I do remember. So in writing this episode, I didn't know if 30-something stories was still available to buy, as it seemed like a very specific book, and now it's dinosaur old, having been published in 1991. It is, but new copies won't have this delightful picture on the cover. That's when I found 30-something at 30, an oral history, which was published in 2017. How did I miss this? After I squealed, I ordered it and read it in 2 afternoons. I adored it, and I felt a camaraderie with Scott Ryan, who discovered 30-something in his early 20s on Lifetime, who on rewatches discover new things, who relates to different characters at different times. There is someone like me out there. Ryan was the co-host of the Red Room podcast and is an expert in television and still appears to be doing podcasts. He organized the book by episodes. Each of the 85 episodes is described, some much more than others. While you will get some writerly information in it, since Ryan interviewed the actors, creators, writers, and directors, and even some of the other cast and crew of the show, there's actually more in this book about directing than writing, which I found fascinating. And let me read you this, which is more about communicating than writing or directing, by Susan Shilladay, one of the writers on the show. That is one of the things in writing that I am fiercest about. I do a lot of writing workshops with people at Sundance. I am always trying to tell writers that people do not talk to each other. Conversations are often really monologues, and people rarely actually listen to each other. To find that moment in a scene where they do communicate is very important, but they don't have to answer each other all the time. The moment when they hear each other becomes incredibly weighted. I never thought about it like that. And it's just fascinating to have that laid out in a book about writing. The nuggets of information throughout the book are profound. But my favorite is how they stole storylines from their own lives and put them in the show. 30-something is a bit like nonfiction, except it's multiple directors and writers and actors' lives mishmashed together. No wonder I adored it so much. It's like I could sense the authenticity in it the very first few minutes of the very first episode all those years ago when I was 14. Because I somehow missed this book, 30-something at 30, I researched some more and discovered a podcast that had a Zoom reunion with the actors in 2021 from Stars in the House. They even discussed the lack of streaming availability. Music copyrights were part of the problem, although I just think someone at MGM is lazy. My so-called life was diligent in getting all their music approved. 21 Jump Street didn't even try. I can't even watch those at all anymore because the music is so loud and obnoxious. It's so sad because 21 Jump Street used so many 80s songs. In any case, 30-something really doesn't use that much popular music, so I don't know why that would cause any problems. Yet, for as infinite as the internet is, 30-something doesn't occupy much space, which saddens me. Because it's not available to stream, no one but baby boomers really watch the show unless you count Scott Ryan and me, apparently. While there may be a few more misfits out there, I doubt many of the younger Gen Xers ever watched it. Any younger generation will never be exposed to 30-something. Even though, obviously, 30-something is dated, Ellen and Melissa tried video dating and they used payphones to call home, which is really weird watching now. The stories revolve around universal themes, like going back to work after having a baby, losing your business, divorce, cancer, and just fighting over laundry. No matter how many technological advances have occurred, couples will continue to bicker over household chores. I have little to criticize about the books. Sure, the information overlaps at times, as does the bonus materials in the DVD. The first season even comes with this little booklet, which also repeats some of the material. But 30-something was only on for 4 years. How much material can you create? If you want some creative tips and inspiration for writing, these books are for you. If you want some script writing information, these books are for you. If you want directing tips, these books are for you. If you are curious about how TV shows write and direct, these books are intriguing because apparently they didn't follow how all the other shows did it at the time. If you want a realistic show that's not quite as maudlin and nauseating as This Is Us, 30-something is for you. If you're in your late 20s, 30s, or 40s, this show is for you. You will see yourself in many of the characters. You will relate to their struggles, their weaknesses, and their successes. If I could relate as a 14-year-old and Ryan could relate at 22, and I still can now when I'm past my 30-something years, the show exquisitely captured how the average person feels about the little things and the big things that shape our day-to-day existence. It's a beautiful show about life, plain and simple. Thanks for watching. My goal at Booksmart is to get a little bit smarter, one book at a time.